In this interview, I meet up with Dr. Mara Linaberger, who is a lifelong educator, author, technologist, artist, ballroom dancer, and a musician, having spent 25 years in service as a public educator, teacher trainer, and an administrator. She is on a mission to create a global network of 100 microschools in the next 10 years. Let's welcome Dr. Mara Linaberger. Thank you so much, Dr. Mara, for meeting me today in the summit. I wanted to start off by asking you, many parents are thinking of homeschooling their kids for this coming fall. And, the decision that they're making that is that, they've experienced some schooling at home during the lockdown. I just wanted to ask you, what is the difference between the schooling they experienced during the lockdown and the homeschooling, the real one?
Obviously, the first big thing that's different is if you're going to choose to homeschool your child, you're going to be responsible for all of the learning. So there's not going to be a teacher mapping out learning activities. There's not going to be someone setting up Zoom calls to talk with your kid. There's not going to be someone sending home packets. There's been a ton of different responses to the closures and what teachers have done to continue to support their learners. So what we've been doing during lockdown has been schooling at home. I mean, calling it homeschooling is not incorrect, but the homeschooling movement looks very different, generally looks very different than what parents were being expected to do during lockdown. So it would be, if you want to be homeschooling your child this year, you're going to want to be looking for groups that have people in the group with expertise. There are many, many, many people who have published about how to homeschool. There are online services that provide supports. But honestly, my favorite and the work that I do focuses on kids being self-directed. So, it might look for your family like finding out what your kid is really interested in and then curating resources and materials for your child in that passion area.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Why are so many students unmotivated to learn?
Well, I think it's exactly what I just said to you. It's because in our traditional school systems, there is not a lot of opportunity for kids to pursue the things that they're interested in, to pursue their passions. It does happen. I'm not saying that school is all bad. It certainly is not. There are many, many examples of fine schools out there where kids are thriving, but many others where standards, curriculum, traditional assessments are the things that are actually running what happens every day versus the child being the focus of school. And I think in those cases, kids know it. They may not cognitively think school is not about me, although there's a few kids out there who have figured that out. But I think intuitively, subconsciously, many, many kids know that school isn't really about them. It's about preparing them to be working in an industrial model kind of job. It's asking them to memorize things that they may or may not be interested in. It's asking them to do a whole lot of things all day long that they're not particularly interested in. And I think that creates a whole range of emotions in kids. And it's why we see a lot of the behaviors that we're seeing.
And that's what you were saying earlier, the homeschool kind of fosters that, right? The individuality of the child, like, if they're unique learners.
I mean, it doesn't automatically. It takes a parent who is willing and able and fearless enough to try that out, because it's not simple. But there are a lot of supports out there to help that happen. Yeah. I mean, if a parent simply sets up a school-like atmosphere at home and maps out a school day that looks similar to what happened in the traditional school at home and tries to work their child through it, it's very possible that their child's going to rebel at home just as much as they did at school, because sitting, for an hour learning one topic and filling in worksheets or taking tests isn't something that kids wanted to do at school all that much. They're not going to be any happier doing it at home. There's a great movie that parents can watch out there. It's called um, oh my goodness, it just totally slipped my mind. It will come back, but it focuses on the story of one mother who chooses to take her children out of school, and she kind of sets up school at home for her kids. And I wish I could think of the name of it. I can't believe it's slipping. But if I can't remember it before the end of our interview, I will absolutely get it to you, and you can and share it with your listeners. But the mom basically starts out recreating school at home, and her daughters, they don't say it this way, but they kind of look at their mom and say, like, no, like, this is just like school. We don't want to do this. So they go through a journey of trying out some homeschooling groups in their community. One in particular that's doing a set of activity that's called Classical Conversations. And then they wind up doing a more self-directed, unschooled sort of version of school. And then finally, actually, the oldest daughter chooses to go back to a traditional high school, but with eyes very wide open about what she wants, what she needs. And it's an interesting story. It gives parents a really good idea of what homeschooling isn't, can be, what might work. So highly recommend watching that.
Okay, thank you. You're an ex-teacher, so the excitement in students to learn these days are different than what it used to be, right? So why do you think that shifted? Like, what's going on now that we all didn't fight like sometimes our students are fighting now against learning, right? In a way.
Well, I think there's a little bit of a misnomer there. I think all generations think that the younger generations are so different than the ones that, than their generation was. But if we really are honest, if you and I are honest, we were rebels in our own way, I think, School for me, I'm in my 50s, so school, 40 years ago, was actually really different than it is now. There was more time. The curriculum wasn't as big of a driver. Here in the US, there has been legislation that has really changed what happens in school and how school is regulated. There are just more constraints being placed on schools every day about what they must do, how they must document progress, and those kinds of things, unfortunately, begin to change what can happen in the classroom and how much creativity happens on the part of the teacher. I think when I was a kid, my teachers had the freedom to be much more creative. And frankly, the things that I actually remember about school when I was really young were all of the creative pieces. That was what was important to me. Those pieces were still there. I think some of those have disappeared.
Yeah.
But I also think kids are much more aware because they have access to the internet. So they're much more aware of opportunity. They're also much more aware that there are other kinds of things going on in the world that are different from the experiences they're having. And so again, I think kids are either consciously or unconsciously, they know that there is a misfit between who they are and what they want and the way in which school provides opportunities for learning.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And that's kind of why people think a lot of, high schoolers, you hear them, parents or other people calling them lazy or unmotivated all the time because there's that unfit, like they're not getting what they need, right? In the environment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there are lazy and unmotivated kids out there.
Yeah.
But I do think that most of the kids that are getting that label actually just lack the language to say that they don't feel like their needs are being met, and therefore they're not going to put a lot of effort into something that they don't really care about. If you think about it, the things that we're willing to do in our lives really have a lot to do with, as adults, we try to do, many of us, those of us who are entrepreneurial and business people, for sure, we do the things that we enjoy, because if we don't enjoy them, they become drudgery. Certainly many adults are forced to take work that doesn't feel meaningful and valuable, but more than ever before, there's really an opportunity to be doing work that feels meaningful and it's contributive to society in general. And I think because of the internet and because of young people, I'll give the example of Greta Thunberg or Malala, we have young people who have the world is their platform, and they're doing advocacy work. Malala's is around education, and Greta's is around the environment. And I think our younger generation is seeing young people like that and wanting something different.
Mhm. Yeah. And, is it true that if you're in an environment that's not really fostering you, you'll kind of learn helplessness, right? And you kind of become a bit in tune to being lazy or not wanting to try anymore because it's like it's not fitting what I want or what I need in the
Well,
school.
I think that those kind of behaviors come out of the assessments. And so if we think about ourselves as adults, can you imagine going to work every day
Mm,
and having your employer um, test you and hand you back a piece of paper with a grade on it?
mm,
And can you imagine not beginning to actually measure yourself against that letter or that number?
mm,
It's a very insidious kind of thing. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be assessing children. We need to be figuring out what they know and what they don't know and helping them to fill in gaps and to learn. But um, grades are can be a very corrosive thing for kids when they
mm,
aren't doing well. So if a child doesn't learn in the predominant method that's used for instruction in the classroom, their assessments will reflect that. And I think it's very difficult for a child to not take that to heart and think that that's a reflection of who they are as a person. You know, all the grades are really meant to do is to help teachers understand where they need to change their instruction.
yes.
But we aren't doing a good job of communicating that to children.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, what is the micro schooling movement?
Sure.
Big part of
So, it's a very unstructured movement. I would consider myself one of its champions, but there are many other people who are doing that, and it's basically there are globally a growing number of people. Some of us are educators, some are parents, some are other concerned citizens who believe that children deserve more self-directed learning opportunities, the opportunity to learn and grow and explore ideas in a small environment where
it.
you are known as a human being
Mhm.
first and foremost as a learner. So they're small, and there are several different businesses that have created models that are being replicated sort of in a franchise method. There are a couple other groups that have models and are teaching people how to build schools similar to theirs. That's the kind of work that I do. I have a business that helps frustrated teachers to take this idea they have for owning their own school and to build the school of their dreams in under a year without giving up the salary that they were used to or
Mm,
giving up their sanity from, either having to continue to teach in ways that don't feel good or the insanity of trying to figure out how to build a business. When if you're an educator, business building skills aren't probably the thing that you know well. So Microschool Builders is a company that provides primarily really strong foundations in entrepreneurship
yes.
for teachers so that they can be successful at opening their own school. And we also network all of our schools together so that there's opportunities for the teachers to have collegiality and for the students to connect and collaborate as well.
So is it run by then one teacher? One school will be run by one teacher or many collaborate?
In general, I mean, it's up to the person. So, an ideal client for me comes to me with an idea, and what I typically do is work them through a proof of concept idea. They open a
Mhm.
small school themselves um, on a fairly shoestring budget. I don't want to see them spend a lot of money on an idea that doesn't have validity in their community, but we do lots of market research and we work on marketing strategies. Um, we map out an initial budget that keeps the costs down, but helps the teacher to pay themselves a salary that either replaces what they would have been earning in a teaching position or potentially more. I have some clients who have chosen to take less money for themselves because their situation allows for that.
Mhm.
Perhaps they have a spouse that's the primary breadwinner in the family and supports the idea. So it's possible to get by on less, but my job is to make sure that there's a sound business plan, sound
Mhm.
budget, a marketing strategy, and then I also have services that I provide once people get to that point to help them go through the launching of the school and support them through the first year and beyond. I have a client right now who's in her 4th year. She'll start her 4th year this fall. And this year, she and I have been working together to create a strategy to purchase property. So she wants to move from her basement where she founded the school to a farm property. So we've worked on figuring out all of the logistics and processes that need to go behind how many students she needs to have in order to make that a functional move, when and how to advertise the move to this property, when to recruit new families, and then all of the supports behind the processes of purchasing the property. And she's actually had to go and get zoning changed in the location for that property. So, navigating all of that stuff together. So we have, we kind of take people from the idea all the way through the launch and then even beyond.
Perfect. So what is the number of students in one of these schools? Like how many?
It really ranges. I have a client that for the last year, as she was working on her idea, she took in 1 student. I've had clients, and in her situation, she was still working.
Mm-hmm.
So she was incubating the idea and testing out all of her instructional strategies with that student. But I typically advise around 10, and that's simply because it creates a nice community for the learners, but it also has this potential to provide a decent salary for the school owner. Now, in the era of the pandemic, in most cases here in the US, the numbers that are being suggested by the CDC for gatherings are 10 or less.
Mm-hmm.
So most of my school owners have amended their numbers to just have 9 students.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. So when they're how are the education then? You said it's going to be student-centric, right? It's a learning process. So when there's 10 students, for example, like is it different grades altogether? Like it doesn't matter. Are they in the same grades, or how does it work? Like you collaborate everybody together, and then
it depends again on the school itself and the school owner. So I mean, I have a client who is going to be working this fall with students with special needs who are either ADHD or they might be high functioning on the spectrum. They'll all have individual learning plans, and most of the work will be done independently together in a group. I have a client who's got students who are age ranges of about 8 to 13. So one of the ways that she works with them is they have a group morning meeting. They do reading and mathematics content independently, and she's using some technology, some online I can't even say the word, adaptive technologies to support that. But she is working with them individually during that time as well. They do whole group activities related to topics like social studies and science and art, and those tend to be integrated ideas. So they'll pick a big theme. The students will choose things that they want to learn about. She'll provide some content. She does actually do a lecture for them, partly because she wants them to have an experience of that so that they'll be prepared, because many of them want to go to college. She teaches them note-taking skills, but that's only a small part of it, and it's only one small portion of their day. In the afternoons, each one of them is working on something she calls a passion project. So it's basically an individual learning plan for something that they want to learn about. So she's supporting them, curating content, having them, matching them up with experiences, and then creating ways in which they're going to demonstrate their learning outcomes from that project, setting up opportunities for the families to come in and hear about these projects when they're complete, etc. So there's a lot of different ways. I have a client that every one of her students is a gifted learner and has an individual learning plan, and she's got them matched up with faculty from a local college. So they're working one-on-one with somebody from higher education. So it really depends. Everybody goes at it in a different way. It's part of why we're so different from the other folks out there who are in the microschool movement, because I'm not telling anyone that they need to follow a particular model for learning. I think if we're going to have students be independent learners, then each one of the school owners needs to have independence in the way that they set up their school.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Otherwise, it'll become a school, traditional school again, right? Kind
Well, I
of.
mean, it is one of the potential challenges to having a model that you use. I think it's better for people to choose the models that they like and to create something that's originally their own.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about making sure that the model is actually what's wanted and needed in the community from the learners that they want to work with. So, if you've chosen a model that doesn't, if you choose, let's say, you're going to open a forest school, but there's no one in your community who even is aware of that or thinks that having kids outside all of the time to do their learning is beneficial, then the school is not going to actually be viable. Just like opening an arts focused school in a community that has very heavy science or mathematics based adults, it may or may not be seen as something of value. So you have to, it's a combination between the thing that you're passionate about as an educator and what's actually wanted and needed in the community.
Mm-hmm. So if I want to give the parents who are listening the correct idea of the, if you're in the traditional school, which is, if you're not liking it or whatever is happening right now, it's making you feel like you want another alternative educational option, right? There's microschool. So private schools, it's almost like a private school, but it's not as big, right? And what else is the other differences? Like what is the benefit for a parent to send?
So it can be some of our microschools actually are approved private schools and some of them are not. Some of them have situated themselves as homeschooling resource centers that have more full-time options. We have one school that's set up that way. Some are set up as tutoring centers. That actually is just dependent on what here in the US, we have the 50 states. Every one of our states has a different school code. So we take the time, and it's probably the same in Canada as well, where you are. Each one of your provinces has a different set of regulations regarding how school, what happens to children in regards to learning, what is possible. So that stance is determined based on the code. But in comparison to private schools, yes, primarily it's that they're much smaller. They are almost always children at multiple age levels, grade levels. And there's a lot more collaboration between the students. There's a lot less structure. Even most of our private schools nowadays have become more similar to public schools than they are to what microschools are. So these are really, some microschools, not any of the ones in our network, but some microschools actually don't require students to do anything that they don't want to do. Democratic and free schools have a very, very open idea about allowing students to direct their own lives and to not force anything on students. I wouldn't say that our micro schools force anything, but there is a lot of freedom for students to do the things that they want to do. To build independent learning skills is really the goal.
Yeah. So a parent who would send their kids to microschools would be someone who doesn't like traditional or the private, or it's, sometimes privates are very expensive as well, right? And then they don't want to homeschool or unschool, like they don't have that time, then they will use microschool kind of.
Yeah, I mean, really the ideal client for a microschool is a parent who knows that their child isn't happy or wants their child to have a different experience than the public school. Probably wants their child to have more attention paid to them and more attention paid to their specific strengths, weaknesses, and interests. Microschools can be less expensive than private schools, but they aren't always. Okay. Because actually the value that's being provided to parents is even greater. If you think about it, our world is really changing rapidly, and what is needed are people who know how to read, how to think critically, how to ask questions, how to investigate an idea or a topic, or look for solutions to problems in unique and different ways. And those are not the skills that are being taught in our public schools generally. And not as much even in our private schools. Our private schools have, at least here in the US, have tended, and again, this is a generalization, there are many fine examples out there. Parents have to be savvy and they have to ask lots of questions, and most importantly, the goal should really be to find a place where their child feels happy, safe, secure, connected, valued. One of the things that I think is missing in education is making sure that our kids are having fun.
Yeah.
Our kids come home at the end of the day and don't want to talk about school because it wasn't fun. Basically, what they want to do is forget the day. Kids in microschools, will talk and talk and talk and talk and talk about what they did during the day because they have been engaged in things that were interesting to them. And I think that's the person who wants a microschool, yes, wants the feel of a homeschool without having to do that for themselves. That's really it sits sort of between there, the person who knows that their kid would really thrive in a homeschool situation and wants someone else to do it for them. And also the parent who knows that their kid in particular is really gregarious and outgoing. And not that microschools are only for extroverted kids. It's not what I'm saying, but an extroverted kid might have difficulty being homeschooled simply because they want to interact with other kids.
Yeah. If they want to go back to university or something, right, later, if they choose to do post-secondary, do you guys start from kindergarten to high school, like microschool? Do they go
Again, it really depends. The way that I'm approaching it is to have the school owner open the microschool in the sweet spot of their particular skill set.
Oh, okay.
So, they don't always, some people will start with the sort of early elementary, primary grades. I have a client right now who's like, my kids that I like to work with are middle schoolers and high schoolers who have fallen through the cracks, who are not reading at grade level, not learning at grade level, and who in a public school setting will have an IEP, an individual educational plan, and who will honestly just have things dumbed down for them. In a lot of cases, her ideal student does not lack intelligence. There is just some wiring difference or some disconnect in their ability to learn in the ways that school has them trying to learn. And she loves to spend time trying to figure out what is it that makes these kids tick and how can she actually reach them. So, in many cases, a school will open with a particular age range or a grade level range, but then as it grows, it will add on grade levels, or it will, if it started with older kids, it'll back those down as people in the community begin to ask for access to that. It's really a smart way to open a business because you're focusing on where you have the clients and the need, and then you're expanding and you're growing with your community instead of just trying to open and say, we serve everybody from K to 12. That's trying to be something for everybody. And that's really what our public schools are designed to do. And we're not trying to replicate that.
No. So can they go from microschool, let's say there was a high school student, to directly into university? Is it all the credits are made? Like, are they making all the requirements?
Yeah. So I can give you an example of one of my clients. She created an alternative transcript for her students. She had both of her students that were seniors this year got accepted into the colleges that they wanted with this alternative transcript. I think we're at a time now, if you think even too with the pandemic, our students have not been able to take the SAT or the ACT this year. So they will be, doing college applications. Our seniors in high school this year will be doing college applications without those assessments. Colleges are going to have to shift how they assess a student's readiness for their college's programming. Increasingly, though, some of our more forward-thinking colleges are actually making those typical assessments less necessary. And almost all colleges have begun to look at ways to evaluate homeschooled students. And in fact, I've heard and I've read that homeschool students often do as well, if not better, than traditionally educated students because they've had the freedom to think for themselves, to become independent learners. That's what we expect of students when they get to college, right?
Yeah.
You're on your own to get yourself to class on time, and there's nobody there holding your hand to make sure you do your homework.
No.
Or you get to bed at time, at night. So our homeschooled students, having had much more freedom and independence, mainly the only things that they need help with are learning how to take a test, or making sure that they can write a paper well, so that if that's the assignment they're given, they know how to approach those kind of things. But those are fairly simple tasks, and most of our micro schools, build those things in for transition. In fact, a lot of them are actually, like I said, the one in California is having students interact with college level faculty. So the kids are going to get that experience built in. It's my suspicion that the college is making that connection to the micro school so that it can take a look at the students that are coming up and start to select out the ones that they want to invite to come to the university. So I think we're going to start to see more of those kinds of collaborations as the movement continues to grow over the next few years.
Yeah, I think it's changing as well, because we used to be all like, restricted. These requirements were so strict, right? You have to go through this high school, you have to have this, even with homeschooling, I've been learning that you can keep a clear record and go for an interview and all these things, right? Ways to get into college in other ways, other means, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I know, I'm pretty sure in Canada, most of your provinces require, as long as you're documenting the learning as you go along, you can have a stamp of approval put on you have completed, a high school education equivalent. Here in the US, we have people who will actually look through a homeschooler's portfolio and do the same thing. They will certify that the student has completed the general learning that's expected, of a high school student, and that suffices. So microschools have the capacity to do that as well, and some of them are doing it. Some of them are going ahead and getting themselves accredited as approved private schools and just remaining small. And I think of the schools that I'm working with, that's a goal for many of them, but right now they're in that startup phase of testing out the idea, of finding founding families, of getting themselves into a solid location with a solid, educational process and recruitment process. So that will be something that happens down the line.
Very good. So if parents are interested in what you've been saying right now in the interview, how can they find a microschool? Where can they find it?
They can certainly visit my website. I do free consults with parents if they want to know more about the schools that are part of our network. But you can also visit that's microschoolbuilders.com. But another really great place to go is the website of the Alternative Education Resource Organization. And I believe their website, I have to double check on that.
If you email me, I can put it for the parents.
Yeah, the Alternative Education Resource Organization, if you Google that, they have a web page on their website that lists all of the schools that they've helped to open. And that's a global list of schools. So, but you can look into those. You can look into the Liberated Learners Network. You can look into the Acton Academies group of schools in the US. Here, there's a group in Arizona that are opening a series of schools called Prenda Schools. So really it's, you want to you can do a Google search for schools near me, or alternative schools near me, or micro schools near me, and see what comes up.
Okay, perfect.
And the thing is that the landscape keeps changing every single day. So it's a kind of a moving target.
Okay, cool. Are the prices all same, or is it dependent on the specific area and the owner, because it's owner run, right?
It's the latter. So, I know that Acton Academies, they try to keep their tuition around $10,000 across the board for all of their schools. And they've predicated their model on that. I don't know that all of them can hold to that based on where they are and what the cost, the overhead is for running the school. I know Prenda's, theirs is lower, but they're part of a charter license from the state of Arizona, so that they, the child's tuition is subsidized. I've had a client whose tuition was $25,000 a year, but the typical private school tuition in her area was $30,000 and up. So she was competitive. I think what you will see is that microschools will be competitive with the private schools, and with potentially here, the biggest competition that they have that makes it challenging are the Catholic schools, because the Catholic schools here in the US typically charge a good deal less because the schools are subsidized by the parish that they sit in. by the parishioners. So the costs are not all borne by the tuition that the parents pay.
There's some funding. You're a big believer in the microschooling because you're behind this movement, right? So why do you believe that it's a better way to educate? You've kind of shared some of it already, but
I just think that we need to have more options for kids. Our schools are trying the best that they can with the resources they have, with the budgets that they have to meet the needs of all kids. The thing that I know is people don't generally go into teaching without some kind of an altruistic belief in their heart that they're here to serve children. But unfortunately, I think that schools have become big businesses. If you really sit and look at it, schools have become a slave to the school board, which is, here in the US, our schools are funded through property tax assessments. So, it's this balance of like, how much money can we bring in? And then what can we do with that? And providing the best education we can with the dollars that we have. The problem with that kind of thinking is it's money equals this is what we can do. And the child gets lost in the middle. I think our micro schools, because they're usually owned by a single teacher, and at least in my case, I spend a lot of time focusing on helping the teacher remain focused on the child is the primary reason that you're opening this school. Being in service to that child and that child's dreams and hopes and passions is the single best thing you can do for them. I think we're at a time where everything is changing. There's so much crisis right now. And in order to do that, in order to survive all of this, we need to take better care of ourselves and we need to take better care of each other, and we need to be more in community. And that's the thing that micro schools do is they're small, they're community based, they move a little less, they move slower, more intentionally with the children that they're serving. And I think the lockdown has shown us all that there's a real benefit to that. I mean, while it's been challenging for a lot of us, many of us have found many moments of joy being released from really hectic, busy schedules. And I think that's the thing that the micro schools do. And the movement is just helping to raise awareness about micro schools and the potential they have to really serve kids well.
Even, what's happening right now is like a pause for all of us to realize that we're moving so fast in life, right?
Yeah.
Let's just reflect and do something a little better, not run with the time, right? What is your advice for parents, who are on the fence about sending their kids to traditional school or, looking at alternative schools like microschool or homeschool or unschool or whatever that fits their family, right?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, a parent has to decide, what they can bear as far as what they can handle financially, because making a choice to move to a private school or a micro school is going to require some skin in the game financially, whereas a public school, is free. It's not really free, but truthfully, I think the most important thing is to find out what your kid wants and needs. I would be having a conversation with my child about how they feel about going back to school and finding out what were the things that that they've missed. And what are the things that they won't, that they haven't missed, and what are the things that they would like that are different. And then just to be, as an adult, listening really closely to see if going back to the public school is going to meet their needs. And if it is not, then talking about, what would the child like to be doing instead? I would make the child part of the conversation, because at the end of the day, the child's only going to be happy in a micro school if it feels right.
Whichever way they go, they have to be okay with it.
And every kid's different. Some kids are fine with public education the way that it is. Some kids thrive there. And many others do not. So, it's just a matter of getting to know your child, getting to know what they want and need. Your listeners, when they visit my website, they can grab free copies of both of the books that I've written. My second book, which is what the business was founded on, is called The Microschool Builder's Handbook, and it walks you through how to open a micro school. But my first book was called Help, My Child Hates School.
Yeah, I like that title.
And it walks parents through how to figure out what's going on with your kid and what's the right fit for your kid. So you can get a free copy of that. And I would love to hear from you if that's valuable, but there's a lot of tips on questions to ask. And then it lays out all of the kinds of options that are available out there to help you know where to look and how to find the right school that fits who your kid is and what they need.
Yeah, I would definitely find the links you've talked about in the meeting and put it for them so that it's in one place they can access.
Great.
Because the most important thing, what I'm doing right now, is to gather that for them so that this decision becomes not something that they're making it on an emotional basis, but after they analyzed all the resources out there, like, you put out a great content, right? Like that book you just said is
Yeah.
got lots in it that they can learn, understand, and then talk to their kids about it, right?
Yep, there's all kind of like little guides that you can print out and do with your kids and find out what makes them tick, and that will help you guide the choice that you make on their behalf.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all the information, and it's a pleasure having you.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.